Hello and welcome to North 100, a podcast where, yes, we read every comment. I'm Serge. Joining me today, I have a Jer.
Hello.
And a Wheeler.
They said what about me?
I mean, you should see it all in the comments, Wheeler, which we all read.
Okay.
A reminder, this podcast is brought to you by you with your support over at the Patreon at patreon.com/loading-ready-run. Welcome to part 2 of our Adventures in the Forgotten Realms set review. Sorry, that's always such a mouthful. Reminder that our set reviews are not exhaustive. We examine cards from a Canadian Highlander point of view, specifically the cards that we think are going to see play. In today's episode, we're going to be covering red, black, and lands. And I know what you're thinking, but that's not Wooburg order. Reminder, this is not exhaustive. And sometimes we change the order based on episode length, so they all work out. Now, in the previous episode, we got a bunch of comments that we'd like to address. First, we have to make a correction. We got something wrong. We talked about an interaction with phasing and tokens, specifically that tokens sent to the Shadow Realm don't come back. That was incorrect. And thank you very much for pointing that out. Either of you have anything we want to add to that? Perfect. And next up, we had a bunch of questions about a lot of very specific cards. There are a couple we want to talk about and some others that we're going to skip even though they're questions because, again, we only want to talk about the cards that we think are going to make an impact in the format. And there's some that they're just not good. And we really don't want to spend a bunch of time talking about cards just to dunk on them. But there are 3 cards that showed up a ton in the comments. So let's address those really quickly. First up, we have Dancing Sword and Plate Armor. We're going to group these together because they're kind of the same card. Dancing Sword is a 2-mana equipment for 1 and a white. Equipped creature gets +2/+1. When equipped creature dies, you may have Dancing Sword become a 2/1 construct artifact creature with flying and ward 1. But if you do, it's no longer an equipment and equip 1. And then Plate Armor is a 3-mana equipment for 2 and a white pip. Equipped creature gets +3/+3, also has ward 1. And equip cost is 3, but this ability is 1 less to activate for each other equipment that you control. Jer, start us off.
So the one I saw the most was Plate Armor, and people were saying, oh, it's good in the equipment deck when you're playing a really high volume of equipment. But the thing is, when you're playing the equipment deck, you need your equipment to be especially protective because that often means you're often cutting threats for equipment. So Plate Armor does a reasonable job of getting your creature out of red removal range if you can equip it. But I think that's going to be harder than people think. I think people are looking at this and being like, oh, I'll equip for 1 or 0. It'll be great. And you need to have a lot of equipment in play for that to happen. And even then, giving a creature +3/+3 and no relevant combat abilities, like ward 1 isn't going to protect your creature all that well. I just don't, like, you're comparing it to swords. I don't think I'd play this over any of the swords they have printed.
It's definitely not grafted war gear as another comparison. I want to add one comment and I'll throw to Wheeler here. When you play a bunch of equipment in a deck, it's not so that you can put 17 pieces of equipment onto one creature, because games typically don't go that long. Typically, you have a density of equipment to guarantee consistency in your deck. And in most games, you might have 1 to 2, maybe 3 pieces of equipment, and then you're either dead because you draw all equipment and no creatures, you know what I mean? Or you've already won the game. It's very rare to get to a board state where Plate Armor is going to be free and you either already haven't won or you've drawn all your equipment and you're just dead.
D&T is a deck that plays equipment. It's not an equipment deck, but it is a Steel Shaper's Gift cheap white creatures equipment deck. And D&T usually just plays 3 pieces of equipment.
Can I guess?
Yeah, go ahead.
Jite, Sophie, Bone Splitter?
Close. It's usually like a skull clamp.
All right.
Jite if they got the points, and then a sword or something like that. Or you can throw in like a shadow spear, maybe lightning greaves. But I digress. It's 3 pieces of equipment. And even then, if we're talking about an equipment deck, if you have 2 creatures and 1 piece of equipment, you're probably winning the game or doing pretty well. If you have 1 creature and 2 pieces of equipment, you're probably losing the game. And that's not great. So you don't play that many pieces of equipment even in those decks, and Plate Armor would have to beat out every other, again, we're a format that allows for every card basically that's ever been printed, and this applies as well to Dancing Sword, the card that we're going to talk about. So if we're adding a new card, it has to be better than every other available option. And that's so much. And so if I'm playing a card like Dancing Sword or a card like Plate Armor, let's say I'm just looking for a piece of equipment that is going to protect my creature, or Dancing Sword is going to try to make their removal worse by, replacing it with a 2/1. You get a 2/1 with flying, I believe.
And Ward 1.
Yeah.
Which is not bad. Don't get me wrong, not bad.
For sure, it's not bad, but I, for one, tend to just prefer for my creature to not die in the first place.
Yeah.
So I can just keep cracking them over the head with my Sword of You and lose.
My favorite. One last thing I want to add on the equipment is how prohibitive the white pip is in the costs as well. Yeah, it doesn't seem like a big deal, especially if you're playing it in decks that already have it, but it adds up faster than you'd think.
I do think that for the artifact decks or equipment decks, having white pipped cards isn't the end of the world. It's just you might have to double spell. You might have to double pip, right? And if you are playing a deck with fast artifact mana, colorless sources, all that jazz, and you have to play your creature and your equipment and equip in the same turn, which is not an unreasonable set of circumstances to ensure that it's protected. What if you have a double weight creature in your hand? It's just not happening. So you got to be careful about those pips, Serge.
All right, let's move on to another card a lot of comments came up from, and it's the Blue Aura Fly. Now, this had a ton of comparisons to cards like Curious Obsession, blue aura that lets you draw a card every time. Now, Fly says enchanted creature has flying, hence the name, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, venture into the dungeon. What do you think, Wheeler? Are you adding this as another copy of Curious Obsession?
So much like the issue with equipment is that if I'm playing a deck like Flying Men or even like a blue X tempo deck that doesn't have 1 mana 1/1s, I need that card to draw a card, right? Its fly doesn't protect my creature. It isn't a creature itself. And it doesn't actually replace itself immediately. Like if you are looking for the quickest course of action to get through the dungeon to get value through the Lost Mine of Fandelver, you have to hit them so many times to get Uro Jr. worth of value. And why there's just not really a reason to do that when you could just throw on a Curiosity or a Curious Obsession and have it immediately replace itself. So yeah, don't play this card. Unless it's a boggle.
So, and to put a nice little bow on the whole conversation there, and to give you some insight into when we're forming these episodes, we typically don't pick cards that we're going to advise against, if that makes sense. And we have them every now and then. If we think there's a card that's very interesting, that's going to generate good conversation or talk about the health of the meta or the health of the format, we'll throw it in and be like, this card is a trap. But if there's cards that we're just we're just going to dunk on this, that might be a reason behind why something is omitted. Because, at the end of the day, we love the format. We want to keep our content positive.
You kind of have to ask yourself, why am I playing this card over every other option that is available? And for some cards, it's just well, you're not. But some cards, there's at least that genuine conversation to have. And the end result might be, well, I guess I'm not. But I think it's important to have those conversations with a microphone in front. Instead of something that is just succinctly dealt with, kind of well, it's underwhelming or it doesn't do it.
All right, let's move into the new card section. Again, starting off with black, and this is a little bit cruel. I have to lead with something that is absolutely unpronounceable. I practiced 3 different possible ways to say this card, and I'm going to go with Ace Rarak, the Archlich. Guaranteed it was going to be wrong either way. Akrarak or Asararak? Ace Rarak the Archlich is a 3-mana 5/5 legendary zombie wizard for 2 and a black when it enters the battlefield. If you haven't completed the Tomb of Annihilation, return the Lich to its owner's hand and venture into the dungeon. Then, whenever it attacks, for each opponent, you create a 2/2 black zombie creature token unless that player sacks a creature. Jer.
Yeah, so this is a great value engine for I'm kidding. It's not a value engine. This card wins the game if you have the card Allurin in play. So a couple of non-intuitive things that I had to look up when I first read it, and I was like, I wonder if this does the thing I want it to. You can complete dungeons more than one time. So say you start not the Tomb of Annihilation, say Dungeon of the Mad Mage, and then you complete it. You can just hop right back in now that you know where all the traps are and stuff. So you can use that to gain a bunch of life, draw a bunch of cards.
Like infinite treasure as well, right?
Yeah, get mana. Yeah, basically you just choose not to do Tomb of Annihilation and then venture into all the other dungeons, and that wins you the game. Basically, however you so choose. And because it returns itself and you have a learn and play, there's no cost to playing it as many times as you so desire.
That's a really cool interaction.
Yeah, notably, it's a much easier way to win than the like 3 or 4 cards you need currently. However, the issue is it's not a recruiterable way to win, which is currently what the deck relies on, is like recruiter plus Alurin wins you the game. Whereas this isn't as tutorable, but I imagine it'll still see play because of how easy it is to win with Alurin.
I guess you could go like recruiter into spell seeker into creature tutor or something weird like that.
I mean, when you get spell seeker in the mix, the world's your onion.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like you go spell seeker DT if you really want to. Like,
Sure. Now here's a question, because of course it is a pretty aggressively costed zombie. Does this see a home anywhere else in our format outside of Alurin combo?
no, Serge. No, it doesn't.
Yeah, probably not.
All right.
like
Unless you're going to invest, I think you need at least 4. Is it 3 or 4 to complete? I think it's 4 to complete.
Tomb of Annihilation is 4 steps to finish. Well, if you take the short step, it's 3, but you smallpox yourself.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty bad.
I mean, pox players always end up smallpoxing.
But pox
themselves.
is symmetrical. You don't just want to pox just yourself. You typically want to pox your opponent at the same time, right?
Like maybe there's a loop with this card.
But you can't loop the pox side, because as soon as you loop the pox side, you no longer can loop Akarak.
Oh, no, I'm talking about something that is much, much worse, where, you do some kind of like animate dead world gorger shenanigans. But even then...
And you try to get the ETBs that way. Sneaky.
Yeah. But even then, that's real bad.
Does that work? Wouldn't it return itself?
No, you just stack up a million triggers. Like you just keep looping with the triggers on the stack, I think. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, because you can order the triggers.
But just like, that deck can play Tassiger, Gristlebrand, Snapcaster Mage. There's just like a million. You don't need this card to do that.
All right, let's move on.
Okay.
All right, next up. God, Asmodeus?
Yeah, Asmodeus sounds a bit better because Deus makes sense,
right?
Since it's a devil god.
Isn't it that sweet song? Rock me, Asmodeus, the Archfiend. 6 mana, 6/6 legendary devil god for 4 black. Has a flavor text ability called Binding Contract. If you would draw a card, exile the top card of your library face down instead. Black, draw 7, and a single black pip. Return all cards exiled with Asmodeus to their owner's hand and lose that much life. Wheeler.
So this is kind of Gristlebrand at home. It can. I mean, you could World Gorger with this if you really wanted to.
Could you, though? Does that work?
You activate the draw. You would have to get rid of it at some point. Like, I look at this card and I will try this in Tin Fins because it's a legendary creature that you can get back with Goryo's Vengeance. You will want to most likely, like, I guess you might want to lose a whole bunch of life for some Children of Corliss stuff, but if you really want to, you could just activate the draw 7, hold priority, and then kick Asmodeus to the bucket through like a burnt offering or sacrifice, cheap black instants that get you to sacrifice a creature and then you add a bunch of mana. Even Phyrexian Tower isn't entirely the worst.
So the timing window there is so that you draw the cards and not lose the life, right?
Yeah.
Well, no, you draw the cards without having to exile them.
Exactly.
Right.
Static ability. So you just draw them like normal.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that's kind of neat. I guess a redundancy in that area is kind of nice, and especially because, well, we have a bajillion black mana already. Might as well, keep up the good work. But also just like casting this, like this seems weird to say, but like casting a 6-drop isn't the most difficult thing in the world. And if you were like a big black deck, or the like larger black storm list that kind of plays a mono black control role until it decides to tendrils you out just through, the good old fashioned Cabal Coffers way, you could cast this relatively quickly, with the assistance of a Grim Monolith or whatever. pay the activation and Caracas it back to your hand.
Oh, that's kind of sweet too.
Yeah, like I could foresee somebody playing this card, like casting this card.
Yeah. Like
Uh,
actual fair Asmodeus.
I've played more Necro in this format than I'd like to admit.
Yeah, Necro is you actively reduce your chances of winning matches of Magic if you include Necropotence in your deck.
I'm well aware, but what if you have the sweet foil version?
Oh, I mean, that makes it better. My sweet foil version got accidentally thrown in the washing machine after a Swan's Night.
Oh dear.
Yep.
Not Swan.
Yeah. It joined Cabal Coffer's foil Obliterator and a foil Venser's Journal, the good book, which this card works with.
And you're doing things to my heart.
It was hard then and it's hard now. But yeah, sincerely, I foresee myself playing this. And while that version, the bigger black deck, isn't in my alley, per se, I could absolutely picture myself dying to getting attacked by a 6/6.
Yeah, this will just kill people too, right? You don't just have to use it for combo. It's also a 6/6, right?
Yeah, it has a ton of downsides to it. No trample or whatever.
It's also legendary. You can get Caracas, which is also super feel bad.
Yeah, well,
I like North 100. Don't play plate armor. But this devil god, hello.
Well, I mean, can you Goryo's Vengeance out of plate armor?
I know. It's just kind of funny.
Does plate armor combo with Venser's Journal? I think not.
Next up, we have the Book of Vile Darkness. It is a legendary artifact for black. Has a ability that says, at the beginning of your end step, if you lost 2 or more life this turn, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. And then there's this ability that involves tapping and exiling it and a bunch of other artifacts. But I think Wheeler's excited just to talk about the top line of text here. Wheeler?
Yeah, I'm just down to clown because it's a triple black pipped card that makes zombies if you lose 2 life. And like, it's so easy to lose 2 life. A fetch land in a Phyrexian arena. You cast Sign in Blood.
You have Necropotence in play.
Well, Necro makes it easier to lose the game more than life.
No, but they're both triple black, Ben. Then think about how good your Gary will be.
Oh God, Gary loves the book.
Book of Vile Darkness is better than Necropotence.
Whoa,
hold on. Doesn't combo with Venser's Journal.
That's about what I was to say. Yeah. If I had a book with Necropotence in play, I'm not picking this book.
Yeah.
Who knew that Gary just loved to read, though? I'm learning so much about Gary right now.
Yeah, well, it's all those merchant fairs he goes to.
So, just for zombies, are there other aggro decks that want this? Like, what is actually playing the Book of Vile Darkness?
I'm not playing this in zombies. I'm playing this in a stacks deck.
Oh!
Yeah, I'm like poxing people. I want to play this with pox because it's an artifact and it doesn't really, like, you're unaffected by that, right? You're not going to lose it in any of your poxing or your board wipes or whatnot, but you might losing 2 life in the deck that has, your Bitter Blossom, your whatever, the Dread Horde Invasion. Yeah, there we go. Castle Locthwain.
Yeah. Huh.
Can we still Underworld Connections in that deck? Is that ridiculous?
We probably could. Probably could. So yeah, I think this is limited to that. In that deck, it kind of does what you're looking to do. And for what it's worth, that is a deck where I wouldn't mind playing Eye of Vecna as well. But I don't know about the hand. I'm not going to talk to the hand. But yeah.
Cool. Next up, we have Death Priest of Merkel. It is a 4-mana 2/2 Tiefling Cleric for 2 black. Has the ability skeletons, vampires, and zombies you control get +1/+1. And at the beginning of your end step, if a creature died this turn, you may pay a colorless. If you do, create a 1/1 black skeleton creature token. Jer.
I actually think this card's pretty good. I think it goes in the zombie stack as a lord. It's unfortunately not a zombie, but I think because it's a lord and it makes creatures for things dying. So you can build the zombie stack with an aristocrat's theme, and that likely helps there. Vampires is also worth mentioning, as I struggle to actually. Yeah, it is. It's frustrating. Like, we used to meme on it, but
yeah, like red, black, white.
I just die to it.
Really?
Yeah. There's a lot of good ones.
Huh. All right. Well, then let's move on. That's very exciting. We've got Eben Death, the Draco Lich, is a 4-mana 5/2 legendary zombie dragon for 2 black, has flash and flying, but enters the battlefield tapped, and you may cast it from your graveyard if a creature not named Ebondeath died this turn. Jer.
I love this card. This card is everything I want. This card's, yes, you just get so much value out of this card. It's going to tilt your opponent so much unless they're playing white and have access to all the exile removal. But if they don't, you're going to get them. You can play this in, I just want to play this in like a grindy mid-range deck. Like I immediately think of a Recurring Nightmare survival deck. This card with Recurring Nightmare is just, chef's kiss. Yeah.
You can teachings for it. That's kind of hot.
I guess.
I mean, you're probably not going
sure.
to, but
I don't think this and Mystical Teachings go in the same deck terribly often, but you're right. You can Mystical Teachings for it. You're not wrong.
Yeah.
I like this card a lot.
Yeah, and it has 5 power. It just hits like a truck.
This thing is going to end game so fast.
Yeah, and they have to kill it, and then you're just going to bring it back when they kill your next thing, or you kill their thing.
Well, this reminds me a lot of Alex's favorite strategy in Black Mold, of just these threats that are impossible to get rid of.
Well, it's like, yeah, say they kill this, then you pass the turn. Then they play a thing. You're like, end step, Doomblade it, cast Ebondeath.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, what do they do?
Gross.
Yeah, it's it's not even one of your creatures. If a creature died this turn, it comes back.
Weak to the mirror, though. Weak to the mirror.
Yeah.
Because if they cast Ebondeath, then you're the one getting goozled. So.
Oh man, unbelievable.
I mean, they had to give it the Glory Bringer treatment. You know, I wouldn't want to just fight Ebondeath mirrors.
Yep, matches up very favorably against Glorybringer too.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to the Forsworn Paladin. Despite the art, notably not a vampire, this is a 1-mana 1/1 human knight for a single black pip. Has Menace, has an activated ability, 1 and a black, tap, pay a life to create a treasure token. And then 2 and a black, target creature gets +2/+0 until end of turn. If mana from a treasure was spent to activate this ability, that creature also gains Death Touch until end of turn. Wheeler, what do you think?
I could see this card in certain evasive versions of a mono black deck. Like, just having a mana sink to pump something is pretty gross. Like, if you happen to have the treasure, great. If you don't, that's okay. +2/+0 is not that bad. Like, that's like Ronus activation right there. You don't get trample, but that's okay. And then, like, just the play pattern of, you know, a deck, say, getting this on turn 1, spending their turn 2 holding up, you know, removal or making a treasure, and then they get to untap with 4 and they slam an Ebondeath or a Planeswalker or anything. Like, that's having the treasure tokens as just something that you can, you know, stock up if you really need to is great. And then just Menace on any black creature, even if it is a 1/1, you know, it needs a little bit extra juice to get it going. But Menace on black creatures, especially, you know, black and red creatures, it's terrifying.
Hatred's a hell of a drug.
Yeah, hatred kills a man. And I mean, this card's good with hatred too. You make some treasure tokens, you can get up to 5, and then vroom zoom. But yeah, I don't entirely hate this card. I could see it showing up in pre-existing strategies. But this like, it is worth mentioning that this does feel like this could be a card where you'll put it in your deck, you'll play it for 6 months, it'll be okay, and then you'll have to cut it for something else. You know,
Yeah.
It's like the 100th card. 99th card.
This feels like another one of those cards that has a tremendous amount of good words printed on it that doesn't necessarily add up into something that's good.
Yeah, it's much better it's much better than something like Deadeye Tracker, whatever that.
Yes.
There was a 1-drop from Ixalan that had a bunch of cool lines of text on it, but ultimately just didn't have enough going for it. Thankfully, this card was, you know, printed in 2021, so it's kind of just all gravy. It just depends if you want to pay that much for this gravy.
Yeah. All right, next up we have the Gelatinous Cube. This is a 4-mana 4/3 ooze for 2 green. When it enters the battlefield, exile target non-ooze creature an opponent controls until Gelatinous Cube leaves the battlefield. And then there's an activated ability of X and a black. Put target creature card with mana value X, exile with Gelatinous Cube into its owner's graveyard. So it enters play, it eats, and then it dissolves, which is a very interesting play. But Jer, what do you think?
I think this card's cool, but I find it unlikely that you're going to play it over like Ravenous Chupacabra. And you usually don't play multiple cards in that slot. Like, you might play something a little bit bigger like Massacre Worm, but that deals with like an entire board often. So I could see if you really wanted a second Chupacabra, you could play this over like Bone Shredder
Yeah, I was
or
about to say Bone Shredder.
Skin Render or something like that, because it has a better body. But I think often that ability, which you're going to want to use because you don't want to give your opponent the availability of using a removal spell to get their creature back, you're going to want to do it sooner rather than later, and it's going to often eat an entire turn's worth of mana, which is a big downside.
All right. Next up, let's talk about the Grim Wanderer. This is a 2-mana 5/3 Goblin Warlock. I don't know if I've ever seen a 2-mana
Wait,
Goblin.
this is a goblin?
It's a
Oh,
Goblin.
yeah.
Yeah, a Goblin with the 5/3 stat line. Let's just let that sink in for a second. Has flash, but you can only cast this spell if a creature died this turn. Wheeler.
So I can't stress how relevant that line of text is, right?
Flash or the other one? No.
The tragic backstory that you can only cast it if a creature died this turn. Thankfully, an Ebon Death can die for you to cast it, so that's a plus. But, having anytime you see massive stat line on a body, and it's like you can't do this unless this has been met, you have to look at it with a little bit of apprehension. However, 5/3 is massive. And if you get to play it, there's no downside attached to it. It's just a 5/3 with a relevant creature type in Goblin, as well as, it's in the right colors. Either if you're playing a deck with black in it, you probably have ways to kill creatures, or you probably have creatures your opponents want to kill. If you're playing a deck with black and, let's say, red in it, because you're playing goblins. Goblins are great at having creatures your opponent wants to kill, killing your opponent's creatures, or just goblins will just eat themselves alive to buff each other, and just they trigger, what is effectively like a morbid clause attached to it. And flash is huge, right? Like, imagine you're playing a black creature-based deck, like a black aggressive deck, and your opponent wraths the board. You're already the deck jam-packed with creatures that are really annoying to kill, and then all of a sudden, boom, here's a flash 5/3, just killing most planeswalkers in its way. So yeah, I'm pretty high on this card. Even if there is a genuine downside attached, I foresee this card killing a lot of people.
Yeah, I will be several of those people.
Yeah. This kind of card too is just makes me feel bad about Chain Lightning in a control deck. Like a Chain Lightning in a Blue Moon.
Yeah, you go to pass, and then they're like, great, end step, and you're staring at this Chain Lightning, it's like,
yeah, I just I kill it's like early on, it's like, okay, I'll kill your thing, go ahead. And they're like, okay, I'll play this giant goblin. You're like, oh, well.
Why is it a goblin?
Because it's a Grim Wanderer.
Enough said, yeah.
I guess that's all we got.
Got him.
Great.
All right. Next up, let's talk about Lolith, the Planeswalker, or Lolth. Lolth, the Spider Queen. This is a 5-mana 4 loyalty Planeswalker for 3 black, has the static ability, whenever a creature you control dies, put a loyalty counter on Lolth. 0, draw a card, lose a life. -3, create 2 2/1 black spider creature tokens with menace and reach, 2 keywords, and -8 ability, you get an emblem with, whenever an opponent is dealt combat damage by 1 or more creatures you control, if that player lost less than 8 life this turn, they lose life equal to the difference. JR, what do you think?
I really like the design on this card, and it's really cool, but I just don't think it's quite at the power level for a 5-drop in Canadian Highlander. And if I'm not willing to give it the green light as a 5-drop in Canadian Highlander, probably not many people will. Just the fact that it's not it starts with relatively low loyalty for the amount of mana you put into it, and there's no way to increase the loyalty short of having a sack outlet in play, like yourself. Like, this could just die to a single burn spell immediately, regardless of which mode you choose. And it's not like it doesn't have a clear way to just like lead you down a strong path to victory. Like, drawing 1 card is nice, but like, I've beat an extra card a turn. Like, you're obviously disadvantaged, but it's not insurmountable. So my instinct is this card's not quite powerful enough for the format, but it's a cool design.
Right on. Next up, new removal spell, Power Word Kill. This is a 2-mana instant for 1 and a black. Destroy target non-angel, non-demon, non-devil, non-dragon creature. Jer.
I really like this card. I think it's the obvious comparison is to Victim of Night, which was zombie vampire and there was a third
Werewolf?
one. Werewolf. Yeah.
Let me look it up.
It's sort of the same thing. There's not really many, although non-dragon's a reasonable downside. Like there are decks where they play a bunch of dragons and it will come up. The other three are mostly irrelevant. Angel, you might see some. Demon, you might see two. But yeah, I think this card's perfectly playable. I think it'll see more play than Victim of Night because it's easier to cast, only has one black pip. So yeah, I think this card's a nice addition to the format and it'll see play.
I'm shocked that you like this.
Really?
Well, because I originally was in a similar-ish stance of like, well, I'm going to die to Glorybringer with this in hand, and that's bad. But, thinking about all the demons and devils, right? Like, and yeah, you'll die to like a Baneslayer or whatever. And I was trying to think of demons and devils that realistically see play, and there's a lot more than you would think that do pop up. Like not being able to kill a Hell Rider, everything from like Hell Rider to Rakdos Cackler to the newest, that 2-mana 3-drop, or the 2-mana 3/3 haste from Modern Horizons, Tombstalker, Spawn of Mayhem. Like I guess it doesn't kill Gristlebrand. I just think there are too many things that does not kill.
Like I guess if you're like, I don't think it's like in the top tier of removal spells, but I think if you're like a heavy black deck, you're not playing blue, so you don't have counter magic. Like you're not playing red, so you don't have access to a ton of other early removal. I could see playing it where like it's not in your top 5 removal spells, but you're playing it because you want another removal spell. And like you're gonna have a density of removal where like maybe you use this earlier just to make sure you get the usage out of it, and you keep like one of the more all-encompassing removal spells for later on. But I just think there's few situations, like it will come up where this is your only removal spell and they'll play a thing you want to kill and you'll be able to kill it. But I think that'll be a low enough percentage of the time that I think playing it is acceptable. But
All right, real broad question to the two of you. Which is narrower, this or Go for the Throat, which is target non-artifact
this
creature?
is narrower for sure. But in the matchups where Go for the Throat is bad, it's often just like not a magic card. Where like I can't think of a matchup where this is like they're playing creatures and they have literal 0.
Where this is as blanked? Okay.
Yeah,
medium red.
You're like, they're all dragons, oh no. All right, let's move on. Next up, we have the Sphere of Annihilation. This is an artifact for X and a black, and it enters the battlefield with X void counters on it. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile Sphere of Annihilation, all creatures and planeswalkers with mana value less than or equal to the number of void counters on it, and all creatures and planeswalkers in graveyards with mana value less than or equal to the number of void counters on it. Jer.
I appreciate that they printed this card because there's nothing I hate more than when my opponent flashes back a Savine's Reclamation, gets back like Oko and Teferi. But I just think the fact that it doesn't hit artifacts, enchantments, which is what you really want it to do, like those are the things Black has trouble with. Like Black has countless cards that say destroy target creature or planeswalker. There are just better ways to deal with them, I think, in Black that don't encompass you also wrathing your own board.
Not to mention that if you play this on 3 to like get rid of someone's Oko or Teferi, their Oko or Teferi can just make it irrelevant.
That's also true.
Oh no. Right, you have to wait a whole turn cycle before you can really answer it too, right?
Yeah.
Yikes.
Worth
All
noting.
right.
It does have to sit there for a while, just like being like, you have to do the fingers crossed, like, please.
It's a very nice elk you have there with a bunch of void counters on it. All right, next up, the Westgate Regent is a 5-mana 4/4 vampire for 3 black. Has flying, has ward, discard a card. So if you want to target this with a spell or an ability, you have to discard a card or else it's countered, which is a pretty steep cost. And whenever it deals combat damage to a player, put that many +1/+1 counters on it. Jer.
I actually really like this card. And I'm sure if you've played AFR Limited, you have died to this card. Or if you've seen it across the table in AFR Limited, you've probably died to it. Yeah, I actually think this card's pretty good. I think you could either play a big black deck and just like use it as one of your, all right, I'll play this. If they don't kill it, they probably die cards. Or you could play it in like a black-green mid-range deck where you're ramping a bit and you try to accelerate this out on turn 4 and you're just like, do the same thing. Like, if my opponent doesn't kill it, they're probably dead and it's probably getting you a 2-for-1 most of the time. In the worst case, it's a 1-for-1. It's like almost impossible to not be down when trading with this card, which makes it really, really enticing to play. So yeah, I think this card's kind of like sneaky good. I think a lot of people, when they look at it, will be like, yeah, it's just another like 5-mana vampire, whatever. But I think this card is very good and will kill people very quickly.
Those are the people that have died to Colonian Hydra. Like, never underestimate a card that has some way of pushing its damage that then doubles how much damage it deals.
Yeah.
The last black card we are going to talk about today is white. But Serge, you said it was a black card. I know, I'm very funny. White is a 2-mana 3/2 zombie soldier for 1 and a black, enters the battlefield tapped, and whenever a creature dealt damage by white dies this turn, create a tapped 2/2 black zombie creature token and exile that card.
Well, Serge, this card's pretty good. Honestly, you could have stopped at a 2-mana 3-power zombie. That's just pretty good by itself. Or, you know, zombies are mono black aggro.
Poor Walking Dead, eh?
I mean, we've come a long way from grizzly bears. You know, that's for certain. But yeah, this card's great. If you chump block it, there you get to build your board even higher. And if this just trades with something, then great. It just replaces itself.
I didn't even realize how good this was with pump spells.
Yeah.
Just turns all your pump spells into zombies. Like,
Yeah.
All right, I guess.
And with a Lord, this gets out of hand. If you have to double block this,
Pump spells, just even just like
spells,
making, you know, Liliana of the Last Hope like upticks, like to not the like I'm going to kill your elf, but I'm just going to make your combat bad. It's just really gross. Yeah. I think this card's pretty good.
Yeah, I concur.
All right, let's move on to red cards, and we're going to start off with Flame Skull. This is a 3-mana 3/1 skeleton for 1 red, has flying, can't block, and has the ability that when it dies, exile it. If you do, exile the top card of your library. Until the end of your turn, you may play one of them. JR, what do you think?
I think this card's fairly reasonable in an aggressive red deck. Maybe it's a little too clunky, but I just think the recursion is really nice, and especially with the evasion stapled to it, I think it applies a good amount of inevitability that your opponent's likely gonna struggle to beat, and like you're just upping your chances of hitting Price of Progress off the top, which is, you know, nice.
And to clarify, it's until the end of your next turn.
That too, yeah. So you don't need to do it immediately. Like you can attack and like still play a different creature post combat, and then play Flame Skull on your next turn. So, or yeah, you don't even need to choose right away. You could.
Is this an RDW card, or where does this find a home?
Yeah, I think you can play it in red deck. Like the super low curve versions that Ben's known for probably doesn't play it, but I always played a couple 3s in the deck, and I don't think this is unreasonable to play. You could correct me if I'm wrong. I know it doesn't have Ancient Tomb mana TM, but I could see playing it in medium red as well.
Yeah, I could see it in a build of medium red if you're just like heavy on the flying. Yeah, because that just really pushes damage quickly. And who could you ever imagine blocking? Oh my god.
This is one of those cards where that just takes away the opportunity to misplay by leaving it back.
All right, next up we have Hobgoblin Bandit Lord. This is a 3-mana 2/3 Goblin Rogue for 1 red. Other goblins you control get +1/+1, and it has an activated ability. Red and tap, Hobgoblin Bandit Lord deals damage equal to the number of goblins that entered the battlefield under your control this turn to any target.
Any target?
Any target!
As the official premier goblins pilot of the format, I'd like to decree that this is in the North 100 set review. This also just is basically the every goblin card review. Like, because there are a lot of goblins in this set, and honestly, all of them are pretty good. Like, they're just fine Highlander playables. Some are better than others. Some are a little but you know what? They're trying. And this card makes it so you don't have to try as hard. Like, this is just a lord. It's a goblin lord that doesn't die to shocks, which is already huge boon. And if you have another goblin lord out, which goblins usually does, it's not dying to bolts, and that's pretty great. And then like you just get to kill things
and your opponent.
Yeah, it is so easy for goblins to just poop out a bunch of goblins. I mean, that's literally the deck. You have like the cards that your deck plays that are not goblins or burn spells are just sorceries that make multiple goblins. Like you will be able to make multiple goblins and you'll be able to just shoot your opponent dead or shoot a pesky utility creature they have. Nice scavenging ooze. It'd be a shame if I killed it immediately.
Goodbye, yeah.
Like,
I like that this gives goblins another way to win through moat.
yeah, they really needed a downside, and it's nice to see that we've alleviated that.
Right? You know, like the control player's like, it's goblins. Good thing I mulled until I had this moat.
Exactly.
The Bandit Lord cackles. Right?
I like to see that between the Bandit Lord and Muxus, this is their apology for just Dominaria being nothing but reprint goblins.
All right. Next up, Inferno of the Star Mounts. This is a 6-mana 6/6 legendary dragon for 4 red. Can't be countered. Flying and haste, and it has fire breathing. So 1 red gives it +1/+0 until end of turn. But there's another line of text, which is when its power becomes 20 this way, it deals 20 damage to any target. Hey, Wheeler, you like dragons?
Yeah. But not to just stereotype myself, I like beep beep dragons or draw card dragons.
This is more of a vroom vroom.
Well, this is a beep beep vroom vroom dragon. I like this. That's what I'm saying. I don't want to get tagged as here's my dragon theme deck. All right. Although I actually no. Now that I'm saying that, I have built that. What I'm trying to say, Serge, is that this kills people dead. It's probably the 6-drop that I will play in medium red. Although medium red has played a card called Emissary of Grudges, which is very similar. If people don't know what this card is, it's a 6-mana 6/5 with flying and haste. And as it enters the battlefield, you secretly choose an opponent, which is, well, your opponent. And it has an activated ability where the cost is reveal the player you choose. Choose new targets for target spell or ability if it's controlled by the chosen player, and if it targets you or a permanent you control. So it's effectively a 6-mana 6/5 flying haste that says, hey, you get a 1-shot ability that if your opponent tries to target something you have with the spell or ability, you get to misdirect it. But this is a dragon that can't be countered. And like that ability on Emissary is good, but it's also a 6-drop. And getting that countered feels bad. And you're not exactly playing a cavern in your medium red deck named a fruit, right? But naming dragons in your
little
cavern
more realistic.
in your deck,
yeah,
that's like why that card is in there, so that they can't counter your glory bringers and your terror of the peaks and whatnot. So yeah, I look forward to killing this person or killing people with this card.
This person specifically, wow.
Well, sorry, I was just imagining a scenario where you and I are playing Highlander in person again. You're like, well, Wheeler, I got the moat. And then I'm like, oh, well, I got the Inferno.
Like, well, you got the W, yeah.
And yeah, I guess fire breathing's also cool. I can't imagine you will use that ability to much of an effect, but
hear me out. What if you have Blazing Shoal in your deck?
Yeah, we could do that. Yeah, that works. I mean, you could Berserk too, but like,
there's that new red card that doubles power.
They're already dead, right? Like they're already dead.
Yeah, but it's about sending a message.
Oh,
I think
that's
if you
fair.
kill them hard enough, you actually win 2 games.
What happened to Jer? He died so hard he sold out.
To put a cap on this though, it's not that far fetched to see this card played in something like Blue Moon or Jeskai control. Like it can't be countered, and it kills them dead, and it's a bit easier to cast than Niv Mizzet Perun.
Yeah,
especially for Jeskai. So yeah, don't ever underestimate a dragon that can just kill you immediately. You know.
All right. Next up, Minion of the Mighty. This is a 1-mana 0/1 kobold for a single red pip, has menace, and whenever it attacks, if you attacked with creatures with total power 6 or greater, you may put a dragon creature card from your hand onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking.
This card is fun, but you're not playing a 1-mana 0/1 in a deck that requires a lot of other hoops to jump through, only to still get an ability that doesn't necessarily win you the game.
So even your mind can't think of a scenario to take advantage of this with your sneak attacks and your show and tells.
I mean, if you're sneak attacking and show and telling a 0, we can do better than a 0-1. Like, if you already have the sneak attack and show and tell, you don't need this.
All right, it doesn't give you the extra redundancy there?
No.
All right.
Sneak attack and show and tell, this is not.
All right. I knew people. This is one of those cards that were like, we may as well just cover it right now because it's going to show up in the comments. People will see that art and they fall in love. Next up, Unexpected Windfall. This is a 4-mana instant for 2 red. As an additional cost, you have to discard a card and then draw 2, create 2 treasure tokens. What do you think, Jer?
This card's kind of interesting, but I just don't think there's enough upside to play it over things like Cathartic Reunion and Thrill of Possibility, like the cheaper ones. And they even printed a new one where discarding isn't part of the cost, it's during resolution. So they're just printing. I guess this does get you up a card and mana. I don't know. I could maybe see it, but I think overall it's just a little too expensive. Like, I don't see a great shell for it to fit in.
Right on. Next up, you find some prisoners. By the way, I love the name of so many of these cards. They're just fun to say. It tells a story. You find some prisoners is a 2-mana instant for 1 and a red. Choose 1. Destroy target artifact or exile the top 3 cards of target opponent's library. Choose 1. Until the end of your next turn, you may play that card and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast it. Wheeler, what do you think?
Hold on. I'm just making sure. Okay. Yes, great. Sorry. The wording at the end tripped me up, which might happen to other people as well.
I didn't get it until I'd actually played it once on Arena. I was just like, what does this do?
So the way that I like to see this, and I guess for the folks that are like, why are we talking about this, is that it's just it's a one of the many modal destroy an artifact or do blank, with a braid being the most popular one of destroy an artifact or just deal 3, and that card's very good. This one just says destroy an artifact or
roll the dice. Yeah.
Well, you can play their lands, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
So like it kind of offers this flexibility of just cashing it in immediately for anything, like just making your land drop for that turn or for the next turn rather. Like you can fire this off end of turn on 2, try to hit a land or maybe one of their spicy cards. But let's play it simple. Let's say we hit their land and then great. You're just up, you got their land in play and you're all good to go. Whereas, some other shatter variants, they like the flip side is also just another reactive effect, and like, yeah, chances are you're going to come across a creature with toughness 3 or less or an artifact for something like a braid, but I just like the flexibility that this offers, and then also just can muck somebody after they've cast a vampiric tutor. Or
I was about to ask, because there was a time in Victoria at least when goblins and recruiter stacks were so dominant, people were considering playing Portent just to mess up stacks, just to manipulate the top card of an opponent's library. Is that good enough here, or is that just way too niche and too cute of an interaction?
Well, much like Portent, people just realized, wait, this lets me draw my recall. Or like, it lets me draw it just lets you draw an extra card, for a control deck on their upkeep, which could be your recall, which could be your terminus, your whatever. So people just realized that you could play this as a single blue cantrip, not with not as much immediacy, but still draw a card nonetheless. And so you don't play this for that, haha, I've got you, but it does offer another dimension of, oh wait, I get to hit my land drop and exile the card that they wanted to get to win the game. Cool, I guess. But you're there just for the land drop or the getting their cards or kaboom time vault.
Right on. And the last red card we're going to talk about today is another planeswalker. It's Zariel, the Archduke of Avernus. It's a 4-mana 4 loyalty planeswalker for 2 red, +1 ability. Creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain haste until end of turn. 0 ability, create a 1/1 red devil creature token with, when this creature dies, deal 1 damage to any target, or -6, you get an emblem with, at the end of the first combat phase on your turn, untap target creature you control. After this phase, there is an additional combat phase. Jer, your thoughts?
I actually like this card a fair amount. I once again really like the design on it. I don't feel it's pushed too much, but it definitely has applications. I actually think the home I see it fitting in the best and where I'd want to test it first is like a red green monsters deck. People may think it fits better into like a medium red or even more aggressive red deck, but the problem there is most of those creatures already have haste, and so you're losing a bunch of the value on the +1 ability. But the monsters decks often play bigger creatures. They often go up to 5, and a lot of those creatures don't necessarily already have haste. So I think you could get a lot of value there, and you could sort of win races that people wouldn't be expecting you to win by playing this card. And it lets you clog up the ground, and the ultimate's probably winning you the game a good percentage of the time. I think I'd want to test it. I think it might be slightly too weak, but I'd want to test it in a monsters deck.
Yeah, the first turn isn't that impactful because typically you're just going to be getting like a 4-mana 1/1 devil.
Yeah.
So it definitely feels like you need to get a lot of upside on the subsequent turns, right?
Yeah, but if you have a bunch of things like Thrag Tusk and like Wolfie or Silverheart type cards, like Verdurous Gear Hulk, those types of things, like you can get a lot of value off that +1 if that's the top end of your deck.
This card is such a brutal thing to play against. I gotta say, if you don't have a board and they slam this, like it's just you need to answer it or you are going to die. Like this card is boring when you look at it. My favorite comment is somebody I read somebody saying that it looks like a planeswalker deck, planeswalker, but designed to kill people that make that comment.
Wow.
Because it like if you have a board that you're in this mirror match, right, of just kind of like some dorky creatures in play, like ticking this up just lets you push for so much more damage, or even just making like the goblin, sure, whatever, but like ticking this up to 5 and then pushing damage means that they either have to deal with your board or deal with this card, and if they deal with the board, anything else you play out lets you just deal with them, because you just give it haste immediately. You give your Gargaroth haste, or like even like your, I almost said Juzam Jin just to think of a generic big thing. But yeah, this card is terrifying to play against.
All right, let's move on to lands. That's right, dear podcast listener. We're skipping green. That'll be in the next episode. We do what we want. Let's talk about the Cave of the Frost Dragon. This is a land. And the new cycle of lands here is templated in an interesting way. It says, if you control 2 or more other lands, it enters play tapped. So no downside in the early game, which is kind of neat. And then, I don't know, I digress. Tap to add white, and then activated ability 4 and a white, it becomes a 3/4 white dragon creature with flying. That's still a land. Jarrett, what do you think?
This card's really good. If Celestial Colonnade has taught us anything, it's that creature lands that have flying are reasonable and valid ways to try to win a game of Magic. This one isn't quite as strong as Celestial Colonnade. Doesn't have vigilance. Isn't quite as powerful. Has 1 less power. But I think that's somewhat negligible. It has some upside in that it'll come into play tapped a reasonable amount of the time. It isn't a duel, so you don't get to play it in as many decks probably. But like I think DNT's gotta be interested in this card at the very least, probably among some other decks. Like I could see playing it in like green white mid range style decks as well.
Can we just talk about the land clause here? Does that mean that these cycle of lands are more highly valued in 1 to 2 color aggressive decks because you never want to stumble on the early lands and you don't care as much once you've got 1 or 2 down, and thus this would be better over something like Treetop Village, which always enters play tapped? I'm not quite sure how to evaluate it.
Yeah, I think in general they're better in single color aggressive decks than the ones that always enter tapped. In 2 color also, yeah, I think it's better. They're mostly better than the creature lands that enter tapped all the time. I think where it gets closer is the dual lands that are also creatures that also always enter tapped.
Any thoughts on that topic specifically?
Don't get your Seachrome Coast fast land mindset. out of your head before playing these, because you will be in a world of hurt if you play this on turn 3 and you wanted it untapped.
It's similar, but it's slightly different.
Yep, it has to be land 1 or land 2, basically.
Right, because Seachrome Crows can technically be the third land and still be untapped.
Yeah. Which is pretty important, again, for especially for a 2-color plus deck. But I'm with Jer. I think if you're playing a monocolored deck, these are pretty darn good. I would strongly recommend playing them in basically any monocolor deck that wanted these kind of, wants a creature land like this.
Well, let's go over the specific ones again. Then next up, we have Den of the Bugbear, which is the red one. 3 in a red until end of turn. Den of the Bugbear becomes a 3/2 goblin. Why is it a goblin? With whenever this creature attacks, create a goblin token that's tapped and attacking? Pardon?
Yeah, so this one is kind of an exception to literally what I just said, in that goblins is likely to be red-black or Jund at times, but that doesn't matter. This becomes a goblin, and it makes goblins. That's pretty good. Like, this card's great. The cost of playing this for mono red aggro, like, again, I tend to prefer the very low to the ground pump spell galore version of Red Deck Wins, and having effectively 5 mana to get this going is a lot, but medium red for sure. And maybe even like in green red too. Like, this one's really good, right? It's just, this can win the game by itself. But not to say that the other ones can't, but this just builds you an army. It gives you bodies to put equipment on. This one's great. Also, it's a goblin, Serge. Did you read it was a goblin?
And it makes goblins.
Yeah, the word goblin appeared on that card more times than I was emotionally prepared for.
Yep. Have played this with Hobgoblin Captain, and that's extremely gross. And I imagine that this will continue to be extremely gross with, any number of Goblin Lords or, other Goblin cards. Yeah, real gross with Sletter. Real gross with Goblin King.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about the blue one. So it's called Hall of the Storm Giants, and the activated ability is 5 in a blue. So 6 mana now, definitely getting up there. Becomes a 7/7 blue giant creature with Ward 3. Jer.
I think this one's expensive enough and blue enough that it's probably going to see the least play. I think that is what I project, just because it's so expensive and it doesn't have evasion. Blue's the worst color at clearing the board, and so you're either not going to be in a very good position to attack. And although it can block, leaving up mana every turn cycle, this much mana for every turn cycle to threaten to block isn't a winning proposition. Like, your opponent can just keep improving their board, and if all you can do is leave this up to not die, you're not going to win that game. So I don't foresee myself playing this one, and I don't really see a great place for it.
Right on. The black one is called Hive of the Eye Tyrant, and for 3 in a black, you get a 3/3 black beholder creature with menace, and whenever this creature attacks, exile target card from defending player's graveyard. Jer.
I really love the art on this card. It's like a cave that has like the tunnels make like a beholder shape. And yeah, I think this card is pretty good. It has at least some form of evasion, and the cost on it isn't too high, which is, I think, really all you're looking for. Like, the stats, they're nice, but they honestly don't really matter. Like, the lower activation cost, and if it has evasion, so you're not just gonna like throw away your land, is to me the most important things on these cards.
And Wheeler, you're going to take us home with the green one here. Lair of the Hydra. X in green until end of turn. Lair of the Hydra becomes an XX green Hydra, but X can't be 0. What do you think?
That's right, Serge. Lair Hydra, very big. That's it. That's all I had to say. I mean, I'll play this in medium green, and probably other decks too. Like, if you are a green deck that can add a bunch of mana, I don't mind having, a fireball attached to a land. It doesn't have trample or anything like that, which is, great to see that. But if you're playing like the rock, or maybe a ramp deck or whatever, where you just have a bunch of mana you can sink in, and maybe you have a bunch of mana that you can sink into it after you've blown up the board, I think you're likely going to play this.
All right, let's talk about another land here that has been making some waves, and I've had a hard time evaluating it. I'd love to hear your thoughts. It's called Treasure Vault. For starters, it's an artifact land. which is big. You can tap it to add colorless, and then XX tap and sack it, create X treasure tokens. Wheeler, what do you think?
Serge, would you play a Darksteel Citadel that wasn't indestructible?
Anytime I play an artifact deck, I want as many artifact lands as possible, regardless of color.
Great. So that alone is kind of worth celebrating. I mean, I feel you. I would play Darksteel Citadel that wasn't indestructible, just an artifact land that adds colorless. I also tend to play decks that like it when artifacts can put themselves into the graveyard, which this one you could just do it. Like, I mean, getting a treasure token's nice. I guess you would have to pay 2, tap and sack it to get 1 treasure to help fix your mana. Maybe add some extra white mana. But you could also just play 0 and sack it to make a treasure token, or not to make a treasure token. Sorry, just to put it in the graveyard. To have it come back. I'm not trying to be hyperbolic when I say this. I mean this with 100% sincerity. This is the most broken card introduced for eggs in a long time. Like in quite like this card is absurd, and not as much the case for say a paradox combo, but definitely up there. Like this card is why did they need to make it an artifact?
Yeah, that's the stupid part. This card, the fact this is at first I read this card not like basically everyone else. I missed the artifact land, like the artifact card typing. And I was like, oh, this card's pretty good. It's probably going to see some play. And like, I was thinking just Paradox, because if it's not an artifact land, I'm not sure Eggs plays it. Yeah, but then I saw it was an artifact land, and I was like, pardon me?
Yeah. Yeah.
But why? How? When?
Yeah. It's an artifact land, and therefore an artifact with a CMC of 0 that can put itself into the graveyard at any time you want, but can also put itself into the graveyard to make more artifacts.
Many more artifacts that also make of any color.
Yeah. So one of the hardest parts about eggs is getting the loop going. And like that's where you will find the disruption kicks in. But if you can get it going, then you're golden. And one of the parts where you might struggle to get the loop going is your inaugural, like having enough white mana for Second Sunrise, or enough, colored mana that isn't blue, or turning all of that weird floating black mana or red mana from your eggs into something relevant or into more artifacts. Yeah, this card's absurd. You can get it back you can get it back with Scrap Trawler, which is really gross.
Yeah, you don't just have to worry about Crucible effects. All of your artifact return all of a sudden is live with this as well, eh?
But I mean, you could worry about Crucible effects. Like I have played Crucible in Eggs, and I have played, that deck does play Wrenn and 6 still.
So real quick, this is obviously nuts in Eggs for the reasons we're talking about. Does Paradox care about this? Are there like other artifact decks that also care about?
Paradox is also a deck that will play Darksteel Citadel that's not indestructible.
Right.
Yes.
And you also have the ability to filter all of your abundant blue mana now into any color.
Or your colorless mana. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
you can filter into the mana that you don't have, or just use it for utility purposes and know that you can get it back.
Yeah, oftentimes you create an abundance of mana like while you're paradoxing and you just need a certain color.
Like, I will absolutely just generate a buttload of mana, make a million treasure tokens, and then Time Twister.
Yeah. yeah. Everything untaps, and you're like, hey, what's up?
And now you're like, oh, hey, I drew my treasure vault again. Cool. Let me just play this.
This thing goes infinite very, very easily and lands as well with Fast Bond.
Yeah, I mean, it's relevant as well for that. It lets it put itself into the graveyard.
Just the fact that it puts itself in its graveyard lets you start doing a lot of broken loops to draw your deck or gain infinite life.
Yeah,
or it's a little bit clunkier with like Valakut and land types, but still.
It saves you that conversation of like, no, I'm targeting my wasteland with itself.
Exactly. Yeah. I blew up 2 of my lands and I replaced them, and you don't even have to destroy all your opponent's lands. I mean, there's that awkward point with a fetch land of it nugs you for 1 every time it happens, which makes it a little bit harder to go infinite with Fast Bond.
That's why Fabled Passage is like such a good card for those lands decks, and that it's a fetch land that puts itself in the graveyard without any additional requirement or changing your life total, much like this card does. Yeah.
This card's
real gross.
This card's really quite something. Cool. All right, let's move to our last card that we want to talk about today, and that is Underdark Rift. This is a land that also taps for colorless, but 5 and tap and exile it. Roll a d10. Put target artifact, creature, or planeswalker into an owner's library just beneath the X card of that library, where X is the result, but activate only as a sorcery. JR, what do you think?
A couple things just annoy me on this card. Why are enchantments so special? Like, why can't it just be non-land permanent?
Yeah.
And why only as a sorcery? You're already paying 5 mana. Yeah, I don't know. I think because it costs 5 and it's activate only as a sorcery, this is going to be too clunky unless you're playing like a big mana deck that has extra utility land spaces and you think one of those utility land spaces is best used as a single target removal land and you don't want to play something like Maze of Ith.
I wish it didn't exile itself.
Yeah. If it sacked itself, I'd be way more on board.
Yeah.
But yeah, it just has a bunch of things that are just like that makes it worse. That makes it worse. It's just sort of got a couple too many things against it. That they're gonna make other iterations of this card, and eventually they'll hit it. But
Cool direction, but not quite what we're hoping for.
yeah, and it's just the power level's not there. It's just like it exiles itself, so you can't recur it. It's only as a sorcery, and for some reason, enchantments are not fair game. Enchantments, no enchantments in this Underdark.
All right. Well, that is going to do it for our set review today. Thank you very, very much for listening. Reminder, part 3 is going to come out next week, where we're going to cover the remaining cards, green and gold. As always, if there are any cards that you think we missed that you want us to talk about, let us know down in the comments below. Keeping in mind the discussion we had at the beginning about the format, the power level of the format. We'd love to read everything that's there, but if we end up ignoring a card, I assure you it's nothing personal. Reminder, this podcast is brought to you by you with the support of the Patreon over at patreon.com/loadingreadyrun. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.